Cheide.
Hello fantasy gamers, Matthew here from Grey Army Gaming in lovely Lund, Sweden. For today's a few simple steps, we would like to show you how to make very simple and cheap but also good looking and functional hedges. To begin this video now, we can show you the final product. Here's an example of a smaller hedge that we won't be making today. You can make out of Scotch-Brite sort of pads, scouring pads. These are really simple and easy. We use the same technique, but today we're going to be making larger hedges, and these come from the larger sponges that you'd use for, say, washing a car or something like that. Very easy to make, very cheap, and we'll just walk you through the steps that you need in order to make these for yourself. One reason I really like this project is because it is so cheap and easy to do. There are very few materials you need. Most importantly, we're going to have a sponge here, just your typical sponge. You can get these in large packs. Like I said, this is something you might use to wash a car with. On top of that, we'll be adding some paint, some dark green, in this case green umber paint, and once that dries we'll be adding a little bit of PVA glue on the top, on which we will be sprinkling then some blended flock. We've made some of this already in another video, so you can check that out to see how we make that. A few simple things you're going to need: get rid of all that flock. You're going to need a paintbrush, of course. It would help to have a permanent marker. You're going to need an X-Acto knife to cut out your hedges from your sponge, and then some sort of straight edge to help guide your cutting. The first step now is simply to take your sponge and to make out your lines for your hedges. I'm going to use this as an example so I can have pretty much the same size hedges as the ones I've already made. So I'll just line this up here on my sponge, get my straight edge there, and just simply make a little bit of a black line there that I can follow with my knife. When we're done cutting this out, we can go ahead and make a couple more out of the same sponge. With my straight edge now on the sponge, I will take my X-Acto knife, put it out fairly far, and what you're going to do now is just simply start cutting down into the sponge along your straight edge, just so that you get a nice even straight cut that goes straight down. So here we go. You don't have to push too hard, just let the knife do most of the work, and it'll take it down all the way to the bottom of the sponge. And just like that, you see how it pops out, and we have a start of a hedge that is of comparable size, thickness as the one that we already have. So there we go. Let's do a little more trimming here, and then we can get busy painting this up. And having now finished my cutting, you can see that what I did was I got 3 equally sized, equally long hedges out of that one single sponge. So like I said, you can buy these sponges in big packs fairly cheap. So we'll get 3 pretty nice long hedges out of this single sponge. If you have some of the edges are a little rough, don't worry about that. We will paint this up and we'll add some flock to it. You will not even notice it. So these will be great for moving us forward to the next step. The next step now will simply be to slap on a lot of paint. Sometimes the sponges absorb quite a bit, so you may need a lot of paint. Feel free to just use it fairly liberally and just begin to brush it on.
Now I like to go on all four sides here and both corners now, just to cover all your bases and make sure that there's no yellow sticking out. Don't worry if you don't cover everything perfectly. We're going to come over and put the flock over it, and that will be the next step here once this dries a little bit. There are, of course, two ways that you can move forward here. The first way is that while this is still wet, you can go ahead and apply some flock to it, and the flock will actually stick to the paint, and that works almost like the PVA glue. That works pretty well. I've done some with that approach. What I'll do here though is I'm going to paint the other ones and let these dry a little bit, and then I'll be coming back and spreading a little PVA glue on and then adding the flock to the PVA glue. I think that gets a bit of a better bond than just the paint alone, so you don't get flock flaking off onto your playing field. So let me paint up the other two and I'll show you how it looks when we start to add the PVA glue to it. So here's what it looks like now with all three of our hedges base coated in the dark green. Now you want to keep in mind here that you can always experiment a little bit with these. Perhaps you want to base coat them in brown and maybe do a bit of a lighter flocking on top to give it more of a woody, earthy feel. Perhaps you want to base coat them in an orangish or a reddish, or even add a reddish kind of flock to have hedges that are perhaps changing colors in the fall. Feel free to use different kinds of base coatings and different kinds of colored flock to get the different effect that you're looking for. Here we're going to stick with the simple green on green as you'd find in the middle of the summertime out on the battlefield. For the final step now, we have our semi-dry hedge here, and what we're going to do is just put some PVA glue on it and sprinkle on this flock, this blended flock. Now if you notice, this flock has some nice light elements to it which will really pop on that green background. At this point I would recommend that you grab a couple of toothpicks. These will work really well, and pick a side that you want to have down and just stab those in to the bottom. We'll give you something to hold on to when you are adding the glue. And once that's ready, you can begin adding the glue and just simply drizzling the flock onto the top. Alright, let's start by just going up on the top here. Putting some white glue across the top. Feel free to use quite a bit. The flock will suck it up nicely, so you don't have to worry about using too much, and just give a little spread across here so it spreads out nicely. And notice you might need even more. The sponges are pretty absorbent, so you might have to put a couple layers on, but just feel free to just spread it out nicely like this and get a good even mix there. And when you have what looks like a pretty decent cover, just take your flock and start sprinkling it on. You can put it on pretty heavy because we'll be just shaking it off when we're finished to give it a fairly even look on top. So just go ahead and add quite a bit to the glued area and go ahead and give it a shake. And as you can see, there you have the first part of your flocked hedge. Continue in this way until you have the entire hedge covered. So now I've covered all the sides except for this one long end, so we will show you how that works when you finish it off. Once again, make sure you get a good coverage with all of the glue. And like me, make sure you drink lots of coffee before you do this so you're shaking like crazy. And spread the glue out. Make sure you get all the corners and the edges too. Sometimes you might miss the edges and the corners. So just spread your fingers across the edges to make sure those get covered as well. And let's finish it off by just sprinkling the rest of our flock onto there. Shake it off, and there you go. Now as you notice, I didn't actually do the bottom, and there's a reason for that. I mean, obviously that will be sitting on the terrain board, so you don't need to worry about the bottom there. What you can do now is just take some sort of plastic container and just simply set it there on its edges like this, and wait for it to dry and for the glue to suck in all the flock, and I'll show you how that looks when it's all dried up. And now here we have the three hedges that have now been fully flocked and are set out now to dry. As you can see, this was extremely easy, extremely quick, and at next to no cost for what I think are pretty good looking hedges. This method is pretty hard to beat. To bring this a few simple steps now to a conclusion, we can show you how these hedges look while they are in play on the game board. The pictures that you are seeing now are stills taken from Legendary Battles episode number 14. And you can see how the hedges are used nicely to ring around the courtyard, to butt up against the houses, and to provide a nice realistic village scene. In this case, it is the Empire Village. So hopefully you'll be able to make some hedges on your own and to put them into play immediately on your own wargaming tables.
Well, there you have it, a few simple steps to making nice looking but also cheap and fairly simple hedges. Now hopefully you can go ahead with this and make a lot of hedges by which to populate your wargaming mats and your wargaming scenes to set up nice realistic looking villages, fields, etc. Thank you for joining us here today at Grey Army Gaming, where Grey can always play.